So we have three storytellers to end the day today, and they refer to themselves as the Swedish cousins. So I'm going to introduce each of them one at a time. The first is Jan Lindstrom. Next is Marianne Nilsson. And then Nancy Bergman. So despite their last names, Lindstrom, Nilsson, and Bergman, none of these women are Swedish. They are Scottish, Irish, Swiss, German, and English, nor are they cousins by birth. But that's all part of their story, which they will reveal to you. They are, in fact, highly qualified to tell us about the Swedish immigrants that settled in the neighborhood of Lakeside, which was then known as Swedetown. So here's Jan, Marianne, and Nancy. Thanks.
Good afternoon. We are your Swedish cousins, Nancy Bergman, Marianne Nilsson, and I'm Jan Lindstrom. We're here to speak about the Swedish community that began to form in Kenora in the late 1800s. And my first role will be to introduce the Lindstrom family, on whose lives this presentation is based. B-E-N-G-T, pronounced Benta, Lindstrom, emigrated from Halland, Sweden in 1889. 9 years later, in 1898, he married Pauline Anderson, who was born in Bohuslän, Sweden. Here they are in 1904 with 4 of their 7 children, Egner, Edna, and Carl, with Ernie, the eldest, in the front. And here are all 7 of the Lindstrom children as adults. The photo was taken in around 1950. Among them are our in-laws. Alice, second from the right in the back row, married Einar Nilsson, and their nephew Alistair is Marianne's husband. Ethel, on the right in the back row, married Charlie Bergman, and their son Barton is Nancy's late husband. And Ernest, front in the right, married Margaret Sigurdsson, and their son Don is my late husband. So we are your Swedish cousins. Despite our English, Scottish, German, and Irish roots, we feel qualified to speak about the Swedes in Lakeside, also known as Swedetown, Kenora. The Swedes love their coffee, and we've sat through many a coffee break and lots of family meals, listening to their stories and experiences. But seriously, we have to acknowledge a work titled The Swedish Community at Kenora, Ontario, 1875 to 1935, a University of Winnipeg history project by Louise Durham Gray, and she's sitting right down there. Daughter of Leon Lindstrom Durham and granddaughter of Egner Lindstrom. Louise is here today, and we thank her for letting us use some of her material. Louise wrote this paper after interviewing in the 1980s Alice and Einar Nilsson, Marg and Ernie Lindstrom, Carl Lindstrom, and Ethel Bergman, her great-uncles and aunties. Louise's project had 2 intents. First, to present a general overview of the Swedish culture in Kenora between the years 1875 and 1935. And second, to examine the interaction between those Swedish immigrants and the community in general, touching on their relationship with the Ojibwe indigenous peoples living in this area.
My portion is the historical background. The Swedes arrived in Canada as early as 1776, with the greatest immigration influx in the 1800s and the early 1900s. Like other immigrants, during the late 19th century, Swedes largely came for economic opportunity. In the Rat Portage area, The Hudson Bay Company was established in 1836. When the Hudson Bay Company moved to the mainland from Old Fort Island, which is just over the hill here and across the bay, to the mainland, which is just the other side of the railway tracks, settlement followed. Construction of the CPR from Winnipeg to Rat Portage in 1882 further established this community. Gold mining, lumbering, commercial fishing, and later pulp and paper were the stimuli for the growth of the township. Generally, the Swedes moved to places resembling Sweden. The geography and the employment that they knew. Rat Portage offered that, and it encouraged family and friends to follow. There was no guaranteed work when they came. Amongst the early Rat Portage Swedish settlers were Eric Holmstrom, whom, according to Einar Nilsson, arrived from Winnipeg by foot, a journey of some 5 days. And he came in 1873. In 1884, John Anderson and family. 1888, the Edlund brothers, Anders and Jonas. 1889, John Crone and Benta Lindström. 1893, Frank Gustafson. The new arrivals took whatever work they could get. With the settlements developing, they eventually established bakeries, grocery and hardware stores, machinery, carpenters' shops, mining, boat building, commercial fishing, even farming. Benta Lindström was a boat builder, carpenter, and laborer. The Swedes were expected to conform and were considered successful adapters. They left the old world behind, learned English without classes, and identified the positive aspects of their new country. In the Swedish tradition, individuals kept a low profile and assimilated thoroughly. Perhaps due to the dispersed resident locations and the diverse origins of other settlers, cultural and racially mixed marriages were not uncommon at the time.
Why Lakeside, Swedetown for residential area? In Kenora, the Swedish primary residential area was on the south side of Lorensons Creek, and thus it was known as Swedetown, now called Lakeside. In 1905, Kenora's population was just over 4,000. 1/3 were of Swedish ancestry. Choosing to speak either English or Swedish was an individual matter. Pauline Lindström encouraged English to be spoken, and English was eventually was because of schooling and friends. As the men settled in the community and their jobs, women and their families followed. The desire for a building to serve the Swedish community gatherings grew. Bethesda Lutheran Church was built in 1895 in Swedetown or Lakeside. The Swedes purchased the land on which they built Bethesda Lutheran Church for $1. 3 women's groups met there: the Elderly Ladies Sewing Society, later called Bethesda Ladies' Aid, the Dorcas Society, and the Women's Missionary Society. These 3 groups were formed in 1900, 1919, and 1921, and were carried out in Swedish and were meant to serve the various needs of the congregation and the community. There was the Luther League for young people and the Lutheran Brotherhood for men. The Swedish Bethesda Lutheran Church changed its name in 1936 to Bethesda Lutheran Church. These organizations allowed the Swedes to hold on to their individual family heritage and Swedish customs. The church was in use until 1963, when a new one was built on 6th Avenue South. The original church is now home to Fragile Glass, and the second one is the Core Fitness Studio. Bethesda's congregants are presently worshiping at St. Albans Anglican Cathedral.
And regarding the language, in the 1920s, there was a Swede school on Saturdays. And between 1895 and 1930, church services, Sunday school, and business meetings were all conducted in Swedish. But by 1936, the language used was almost completely English. The Swedish folk had two fraternal organizations, the Order of Good Templars, connected to the temperance movement, and the Vasa Order of America, where much of the social and cultural life of the community happened. Ernie, at age 15, was confirmed in the Bethesda Church in 1914, and his confirmation certificate, which I have, is written in Swedish.
Businesses. Excuse me. Enterprising Swedes owned and established many successful businesses. Examples, excuse me. Examples are Lovestrand's Bakery, Crone's Wood and Coal Supplies, Anderson Boat Company, Crolin's Grocery Store, and Holmstrom's Ice Business. Frank Gustafson, commercial fishing, led to his opening of the Kenora Fish Market in the 1920s. And there were partnerships in businesses, Lindstrom and Nilsson and Bergman and Nelson, both formed in 1916. In the photographs of the fish market, note the spur line in front of the fish market. And that came from the rail line, of course. It served fishing and lumber mills, and it ran to Lakeside, all the way to Lakeside. There was also gold to be mined, and many found work in the Sultana, Regina, and Mikado gold mines. Ernie, Jan's father-in-law, was born in 1899 at the Sultana mine. The relationship with the community. The Swedish interaction with the larger community developed as Kenora's dynamic and rapid growth produced much work through navigation on the lake, the railway, and fishing and lumber industries. From their beginning in Canada, the relationship between the Swedes and the English was tolerant and amicable. Allegiance initially was strongest to the Swedish community rather than Canada. A sense of solidarity and an ethnic identity was established through the churches, organized religion, their lodges, and the preservation of their language and traditions. The outward appearance of all this reinforced in the English attitude that they were foreigners. And the First Nation people in Sweden shared many cultural affinities. They were detectable minorities. Both practiced a form of subsistence fishing on the lake, and both relied on their extended families and kinship bands. There was undoubtedly a mutual respect as they worked side by side, pursuing the same activities and enduring the harsh winter conditions. And the First Nations women with Anna Nilsson on her island south of the Gap and a sliding party in Lakeside.
Life went on for the Lindstrom clan and the Swedes in Kenora, with many usual joys and sorrows of family life. One such tragic family story, as related by my husband Alistair, was in 1954, so sometime later than we were talking about. Alice and Einar Nilsson hosted a New Year's Eve party at their home on Thompson Island. Einar Lindstrom and his wife Hilda, along with one other couple, were returning to town after midnight, using the ice road in blowing and drifting snow conditions. Unfortunately, they veered off the established road, following instead a windjammer trail, and they entered the Devil's Gap at the CPR bungalow camps. The night watchman at the camp reportedly saw the vehicle going by and tried desperately to warn them, but they proceeded unaware, and the vehicle went through the ice just past the Narrows. Despite his attempts, Louise's grandparents and the other couple in the car perished. At early light the next day, Einar Nilsson used his windjammer to transport the recovery team to the accident site. Later on, Ragnar Ungman launched a Lindstrom and Nilsson barge, which raised the vehicle.
Growing up in the Maritimes with a Scottish and German background, my daily fare was pretty normal Canadian, with a lot of fish thrown in. In my last year at university, having taken a home economics degree, part of the program required that each student choose a country and be responsible for planning and running an international tea room open to the public. My country was Sweden. Was that an omen of my future? As a result, I was aware of a lot of Swedish traditional foods and knew what a smorgasbord was by the time I was introduced to Ernie and Marg, who I refer to as Amma Lindstrom, soon after my future husband and I started dating. Amma was a very good cook. What struck me about this traditional household? First, the coffee. I was not a coffee drinker, but I loved watching Amma make it. You have a glass Pyrex coffee pot. Boil the water in the coffee pot. Put a scoop of coffee grounds in the top, let it sink to the bottom, pour and drink. I had never seen coffee made this way before. Amma also made peppercocker cookies, and I remember the fun of their Jackson grandchildren trying to break them into only 2 pieces by knocking them with a knuckle of their middle finger. She made wonderful rye bread, Swedish rye bread, and her recipe, which I still use, would have been called limpa, a soft rye bread flavored with molasses and anise seed. They ate a lot of that with ham, head cheese, and or cheese. I always felt welcomed in that household. They seemed happy with Donald's choice for a wife. I could cook, I could bake, and Uncle Carl's wife, Olga, once said, "She makes a good cup of coffee." I thought that was the ultimate acceptance into a Swedish family.
Okay. Look, some of us will have to sit up front with a lutefisk. And just to let you know, lutefisk is dried cod cured in lye. Okay. Some examples of traditional Swedish meat dishes were pult, a type of dumpling made of grated raw and mashed potatoes and salt pork. Prasilta, head cheese. Small meatballs, lutefisk, and sill, which is pickled herring. Home-baked bread and pastries are traditional in Sweden, and those baked by Swedish homemakers included tinnbröd, which is thin bread, coffee bread, and limpa, a soft rye bread flavored with molasses. And very popular as well as Swedish cookies like pepparkakor is a ginger cookie. There was a traditional product called tuckmilk, and that's translated as long milk. Bart always said it was like snot. So it was made from fresh whole milk in which a starter had been added. It was then left standing until it became thick. The long milk was eaten with a spoon from a bowl, always leaving a little to be used as a starter for the next batch. Alice Nilsson strongly believed in its medicinal properties of aiding digestion and promoting regularity, and so made it often. And Bart didn't like it, for sure.
I think many of the dishes we didn't like, but we do have our favorites. My first formal introduction to family favorite Swedish foods was Christmas Eve, 1968. After Julota, candlelight service at the Bethesda Lutheran Church on 6th Avenue South, we joined Alistair's family, including Aunt Alice and Uncle Einar, for a traditional smorgasbord of treats. Outstanding dishes I recall are the sill, the flatbread, the prasulta, or head cheese, and pickled beet salad. Later the following year, working as a lab assistant to the Dean of Home Economics in North Dakota, I was introduced to many delicious Scandinavian cookies. My favorites were spritza, krumkaka, and pepparkakor. When Alistair and I announced our intention to marry, we celebrated in both our family homes with a Swedish tort, mid vanilla creme, made by the Swedish bakery Lovestrands.
Okay. In 1963, before Bart and I were married, I traveled to Kenora from Morrisburg, Ontario, which was my hometown, to meet my future in-laws, Ethel and Charlie Bergman. While I was here, Ethel said that she had a unit meeting at the house, and she wanted to introduce me to her friends. Her unit was the Dorcas Society from the Lutheran Church. And Ethel said, "I must get my dainties ready for the meeting." And I wondered why she was mentioning her fancy underwear to her future daughter-in-law. Little did I know that she was talking about the selection of cookies that she had made for her guests. I had always called them cookies and squares. Regarding the sisters Allison, Edna, and Ethel, I was interested in the arguments that the three sisters had. I'd grown up with two sisters as well, and Alice and Ethel always argued about the thickness of the thin bread, what it should be before it was baked in the oven. Okay, Alice said, "It's bread, and it should be soft." Ethel said, "You're wrong. It should be like a cracker." So, thin bread is rolled out. It's mainly oatmeal and buttermilk, right? And it's rolled out with a regular roller, and then this roller is used. And it has, it's carved with
Put on a special lathe.
Put on a special lathe. You're probably familiar with it. Anyway, and you roll it until it gets little holes in it, and that makes it nice and, well, according to Ethel, of course, nice and thin. Anyway, I also this story. I know that this is off topic, but I can't resist. Edna, who lived in Portage la Prairie, often came to visit Ethel, and she'd take the bus. She wouldn't always tell her that she was coming. So Ethel and Charlie lived in Norman, and of course she got off the bus in Norman. And one time, Edna got off the bus in Norman, walked with her suitcase to Ethel's house up the hill, from the Norman Hotel up that hill. And they were not home. They were in Minneapolis. Unfortunately, we lived across the street, so when we welcomed Edna to stay, and she stayed with us for a few days, and we had a wonderful, wonderful visit.
So after the Depression and World War II, the Swedish community began to show signs of change and assimilation. The language gave way to English. Third-generation Swedes were more mobile and began to move away for work and to attend school. And during the 1950s and 60s, when we three came on the scene, Lakeside had already begun to look more heterogeneous. We hope you enjoy some Swedish treats in little baggies back there on your way out. We've had a great deal of fun preparing this presentation.